You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Right, stop the press. We're just about to update that graphic. It still says 50 miles an hour at the bottom. That isn't true. That was obviously from last night. That is Tropical Storm Dorian, the main feature tonight. We're talking about several things. Tropical Depression 13W as well there. That is approaching the Philippines, has acquired the Philippine name Jenny. We also have Tropical Depression 6, which has formed in the Atlantic off the US East Coast. We'll be talking about all these shortly. But most importantly, I want to update that graphic so that it works properly, and hopefully we'll be able to get through that. My name is Nathan Foy, and I'm here in the studio right now. We're talking about these features together, as we did last night, and I am joined again, like last night, with the team consisting this hour of Sam, Strat, David, and Orlando. Good evening to you all.
Good to be here, Nathan.
Indeed it is. There is a look at Dorian. That is the updated wind speed. 60 miles an hour, 1003 millibars is our estimate that we're putting on it right now, and there's some of the satellite imagery going by. You can see how the storm has been looking in those latest frames. If you haven't been around today, Dorian has consolidated really and is possibly on another intensification phase. There's Tropical Depression 13W again. That's moving into the Philippines. Signal 1 warnings in effect for large parts of Luzon. And also, of course, we have 6L, which has formed in the Atlantic. We don't have a graphic for that. It's spun up on us very quickly. Although I must say, the first thing I've got to point out on that Tropical Depression 6 is that ASCAP found Tropical Storm Force winds, but the National Hurricane Center haven't yet gone with it. Guys, thoughts?
I just looked through the forecast session. It says because they said that it was potentially rain inflated, that they did not go with 35 knots to start out.
Interesting. There's the track map for Dorian right now. Also breaking news, Puerto Rico are now under a tropical storm watch. As you can see there, it's outlined in yellow. There's the chances of tropical storm force winds over the next 5 days. Those are starting to increase. The southeastern coast of the United States now. Florida, percentage chances getting into around the 20% mark of tropical storm conditions. I'm throwing all this at you very quickly. We will calm down and get into the nitty-gritty of it very soon. There's a look at those warnings that are currently in effect across the Caribbean in closer look. Hurricane watch for St. Lucia still. Tropical storm warning for Barbados, Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Tropical storm watch for Dominica, Martinique, Grenada, Saba, St. Eustatius and Puerto Rico. There's some model runs. We'll get onto them a little bit later on, the Westpac one as well. There is the only image I've got here of Tropical Depression 6, which is depicted on the National Hurricane Center's wide shot, the tropical weather outlook, and Dorian there as well, very close now to Barbados. I think it's about 70 miles or something along that, near that number. Eastern Pacific looking quiet, Central Pacific quiet, Western Pacific has TD13W as they have labelled it, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. Alright, let's breathe, calm down. If you've got any comments or questions for us whilst we're on the air tonight, I'm not sure how long we're going to be here for in this instance, but you can send in your messages, type in Force 13 in the chat, and it will light up big and bright for us so that we can get to any questions. And that is something that we pride ourselves on doing. We like to take questions whenever we can. Let's just leave this imagery up for a while then. Tropical Storm Dorian getting very close to Barbados. If you are on the island and it is safe to contact us, we'd love to hear how things are going over there. What is quite often the case for the Lesser Antilles, they're the first places to get the tropical cyclone when it runs its course, so they have the least time to prepare out of any of the places that it might go on to affect. So we want to hear from you if we can. But in the studio here, the team, what are your thoughts on how Dorian has progressed in the last 24 hours? Has it overachieved in your eyes?
I believe it has. I've been looking at kind of the latest on the forecast models, and it's kind of mixed, but I've been seeing that kind of the general consensus is starting to lean it more towards strengthening as it moves through the Caribbean, and there is a good possibility that the center of the storm is going to um, kind of pass between Hispaniola and Puerto Rico and out into the and start to make a track towards Florida. Now that's kind of the question that
Scoot along here.
We're looking at.
That's a black screen. That's the screen I want. There it is. Let's go back to this imagery, the National Hurricane Center track map, and dissect it a little bit here. Again, you can see those warnings that have been colored in. But the track is most important to look at, and the trend, which has been changing all the while, it's now calling for barely a landfall on the Dominican Republic at all, and that will surely send some alarm bells, because the Dominican Republic is a remarkably good buffer for tropical cyclones when they make landfall there. It sucks to be the Dominican Republic, of course, but some very strong hurricanes have made landfall there, and they have weakened massively by passing over the island. If the storm doesn't do that, then there will be a bigger chance of intensification as it continues on to what the National Hurricane Center think will be towards Florida.
Interestingly, though, most of the major models actually show dissipation before it reaches Puerto Rico. At least the parent models, GFS, Euro, HWRF, and HMON, at least to the 12Z ones. But the 18Z intensification models, just for intensity forecast, have pretty starkly shifted towards the storm being potentially stronger as it approaches Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, nearing the 2 to 3 day mark in time frame. If you're able to pull it up. If not, I can pull it up myself. There's a pretty significant difference.
Please do. In the meantime, I just want to point out as well, wind shear is actually expected to be pretty low for Dorian. Relative humidity is going to be a bigger issue. Dry air is what has been impeding this storm the most so far. And again, here are the wind speed probabilities, so we've got a little bit more time to look at it now. So Barbados and St. Lucia pretty much guaranteed tropical storm conditions. That will happen tonight. Not sure exactly when you will expect to see those, but it's going to be pretty soon. Maybe in about 3 or 4 hours. It's moving at 14 miles per hour, and it is currently how far away from Barbados now?
70-some, just about.
I've lost my window that showed the distance, so that's not going so well for me. But I think it was 70 something, or it might have been less. It won't take very long to get there, that's one thing for sure. And then after that, Puerto Rico, especially the western and southern part of the island, have a decent chance now, more than half chance, of tropical storm force winds. There it is, 73 miles from Barbados. So at 14 miles per hour, it will clear those 73 miles in just over 4 hours. Nope, it's going to be more than that, isn't it? I knew I did my calculations wrong. 5 hours it would take to reach Barbados at its current speed, which isn't very long at all. With the wind field it's got, tropical storm force winds will probably be felt within about 3 hours, so it's certainly going to happen tonight for Barbados, and for St. Lucia it's going to be, what are we looking at, tomorrow morning really, isn't it? Dorian remains a somewhat small storm, not as small as it was. It is growing slightly, as you would expect with almost any cyclone in its position. It will grow a little bit more, but it does still remain on the small side. And we've seen precedent in the past for systems in this area. It can go on to help them, or they could just completely capitulate in the Eastern Caribbean. but the National Hurricane Center think leaning towards the former a little bit, hurricane towards Puerto Rico, and then weakening to a tropical storm, but remaining then a tropical storm as it moves through the Bahamas. When you're looking very long range, according to some models, they're calling for the storm to do a curve over Florida and then turn back towards the northeast, so that would be quite interesting. But I've not seen... Well, the GFS Legacy, I think, is the only one that's calling for a Category 1 hurricane landfall in Florida.
And believe it or not, the official forecast intensity, once you get 2-3 days out, is actually on the lower end from the other models. If you want to pull up my screen share really quick, it's still kind of scattered initially because some of the models do want to kill it off or keep it weak as it enters the Eastern Caribbean, but more and more kind of leaning towards that hurricane intensity push within the next 48 hours. And then a few more kind of kick it up there later on as well towards the 5-day time frame. But the National Hurricane Center is one of the only ones that has it go up to brief hurricane strength and then drops it down as far as it does to barely tropical storm intensity before creeping it back up as it gets to the 5-day mark. You'll notice that the NHC one is one of the, I think it's the second lowest at that point, actually, at the 5-day mark.
It does go down quite low.
All the other models.
I can't see your screen. I can't see your screen well enough to see what all the models are, but I think I am seeing a lot of eyes at the end, and they're interpolated models, just like on my screen too. So, a lot of them should be taken with a grain of salt.
Oh yeah, totally. But I'm, looking more towards the initial trend up. Before there was a lot more kind of split straight downwards as well. We're starting to see a bit of a consolidation on the upward trend in intensification.
Certainly, the next 48 hours there looks like it is going to become a hurricane. If you look at those models, you can see it a little bit on my graphic as well. Both very similar graphics, although the x-axis has been elongated a lot on mine, but again you can see that. And just to bring us back to the track models, I must say, on the track models, if you saw our stream last night, there is a massive difference today in how very close-knit the track models are now, and most of them hugging the northeastern coast of the Dominican Republic at 72 hours. One or two calling for a Puerto Rico landfall. Some statistical outliers even calling for a Haiti landfall. I doubt that. But the official National Hurricane Center forecast track looks pretty solid at the minute. Something else that's been sent in here just to show you the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds on this graphic. Puerto Rico there, you could expect it early morning on Wednesday. Dominican Republic later in the morning into the afternoon, and then very distantly, and it could change a lot, looking towards southeastern Florida, Friday evening. That is still quite a way away from where we are right now, but it is starting to get a little bit more confident, certainly more confident than we were yesterday that it might strike Florida, but still we're only looking at about a 20% chance of tropical storm force winds there in the next 5 days.
Yeah, and there's also just a couple questions in the chat. Someone's asking about the recon. Yeah, someone's asking about monitoring the recon planes. Now that we're in the storm right now, the closest one's over the Bahamas, at least for lower level recon. So it's going to be quite a few hours before anything like that. But when that finally happens, we'll be sure to keep it up. A few people are also asking about 06L, asking if it's possible for it to actually hit Newfoundland as a tropical system.
Yes.
I think the place that wants to hit more is actually Nova Scotia first,
yes,
before Newfoundland.
Possibly.
It wants to cross Nova Scotia barely tropical and turn post-tropical right after that, at the 4-day mark just about. I am keen to see if how long it stalls out there in its current position, because if the Reunion high stays a bit stronger, it could get shoved to the west a bit more in the long trend. But right now, it's a pretty confident motion that after the stalling will kick off to the northeast towards maritime Canada.
What we haven't been able to show you until now is the track forecast for 6L, and I believe now that we can do that here. that is the National Hurricane Center's forecast for Tropical Depression 6. Likely to become a tropical storm very soon. I'd be surprised if it isn't one already, personally. And then stalling for a little while, starting to get reminiscent of Chris just a little bit last year, and then really starting to accelerate on Wednesday, and then shooting off towards the northeast, Nova Scotia right in it there, in that cone of uncertainty on day 4 and 5. So that again is something to watch out for. Today was really the day that some people were starting to doubt whether it would develop or not, from what I've been seeing in the community. But it has been slowing down a lot. It's only moving at 2 miles per hour right now. And it's bought itself some more time by slowing down. As you can see, it's still got a good 48 hours of decent conditions, and it could get to a significant tropical storm intensity. I'm not sure what exactly the maximum the wind speed they've predicted.
Maximum speed
50 miles an hour.
is 50 miles an hour.
So 50 miles an hour for 6L, according to the National Hurricane Center in the future. We'll see whether that happens. But there we are right now. That is the latest, and I invite anyone on the team here to show us their own imagery as well. But in the meantime, we can also talk about, okay, that way, 13W. Of course, tropical depression, that's moving into the Philippines. Anyone watching over there early in the morning, just after 5 a.m. This is what the models are looking like. Landfall on central Luzon is very likely indeed, and then it will move on into the South China Sea and affect Hainan Island in China and northern Vietnam. Some models, like the HWRF, have been pretty consistent that it will become a major typhoon when it enters the South China Sea. That remains to be seen, and as you can see, HWRF there is out on a limb on the intensity guidance. Most likely it will be a strong tropical storm, but there is always that possibility it could get a little bit stronger than that with those piping hot sea surface temperatures.
And Nathan, the Philippines site, they have Signal 1 warnings now in place.
That's right. There it is at the bottom of the screen right now. Signal 1 warnings for many provinces in Luzon. Those probably won't be upgraded because it doesn't look like it's going to reach tropical storm status before it makes landfall, but there is a small chance. We'll wait and see, but I don't think so at the moment.
I'm also interested the follow-up behind 13W or Jenny for the Philippines, because numerous models are hinting at another development in the pretty much the same region where Jenny's developed right now to move into the same area. At less than a week out.
Sometimes you get years like that.
Potentially as a more intense system. The GFS so far, at least, has been consistent throughout the last 24 hours at least, that we'd see this next system form in the same spot and move into Luzon at typhoon intensity, which would obviously be more serious than this potentially.
Okay, we're going to do a latest position check on Dorian right now, and let's just see how far it is away from Barbados. We are now looking at 68 miles from Barbados. So getting closer all the time. It's moved 4 hours since I prepared, 4 miles, 5 miles since I prepared the graphics for tonight's stream about half an hour ago, so getting closer.
Yes. Do we have a CDPS rating for Dorian right now?
Dorian
as well?
is at stage 2 on the CDPS at this time, mainly because the rainfall estimates are quite modest, actually. The National Hurricane Center last time I saw, I don't know if that's still the case, expecting 6 inches. The GFS model only calling for about 3 inches at the most.
I mean, it is moving pretty quick, so you could kind of expect that to some extent.
That's pretty good, but there's most likely going to be localized flooding anyway in such a tropical region like that.
Let's take some questions. Start your message with Force 13 in the chat section. Could the storm hit Category 2? If so, what chance does it have? I think it just went by on the bottom of the screen there. I think we're giving it something like 10% chance. You know, an outside chance that it could happen in the next 5 days, that is. Of course, who knows where we will be in 5 days' time when this storm is moving on towards Florida. It's a very uncertain situation. National Hurricane Center in their discussion have really discussed, I should say, it is a discussion after all, have discussed how it is a very difficult forecast that they've been making with the intensity guidance at the minute, because there are conflicting signals. And indeed, this thing could still capitulate in the Eastern Caribbean. We're not thinking that's going to happen just yet, but so many storms have done in the past, yet others have gone on and intensified in the same position. So we've got to watch this very closely, and the uncertainty is something that always gets us. Unfortunately, in this kind of profession, when you're talking about forecast towards 5 days out, it's a very uncertain forecast in terms of intensity, although we are quite confident with track by now. What is assured is that parts of Barbados, St. Lucia, possibly Martinique and St. Vincent and the Grenadines will receive tropical storm conditions overnight tonight, and obviously people need to prepare for that. 60-mile-an-hour winds. So it's not just a very minimal tropical storm, it's at least a mid-range tropical storm, and if it does blow up a little bit more, you could see just a little bit of increase in that wind speed as well.
Nathan, I have a question from Joma on the Facebook page.
Yes.
And I'll put it to the team. Are you guys expecting a major hurricane status once the system enters the Gulf of Mexico?
Well, will it enter the Gulf of Mexico is the first question. That's not certain.
That's true.
But if it did, well, I'm not sure. I don't think it would be far south enough to get to major hurricane status, but it could get category 1 or 2 if it did enter the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, so far I haven't really seen too many long-range models pulling it there. I think only the GFS Legacy I've seen does that at this point in time. Most of them kind of curl it into Florida, then off to the north. It looks like a couple people are asking about 06L as well, if we want to go over that quickly again. People are asking if it's a threat to the East Coast in any way.
Not really. Well, of course, maybe a surf and rip current hazard. But in terms of proper effects on land beyond that, I don't think so right now.
It looks more and more like a threat to maritime Canada than the east coast of the United States in particular. And then there's another question. Is intensification likely if Dorian survives the Eastern Caribbean? I'm assuming that means once it gets past Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, in this case the Dominican Republic.
I think it is a given that it would
models-
intensify at least a little bit.
Yeah, once we enter the Bahamas in general, that's more likely. The National Hurricane Center weakens it far more than other models and forecasts, but it does also start to intensify it at the end of its discussion trend at the 5-day mark.
Well, it'd be interesting to see what ends up happening, especially in the Eastern Caribbean. I feel as though during that period, I believe it'll decide, or like make or break the system if it'll actually fall apart or overachieve, I guess.
Oh, actually, this is interesting. The 18Z official forecast for intensity from the National Hurricane Center is not anywhere near where it is now. It no longer, I'm looking at the forecast discussion, it no longer calls for it to go over any form of land, peaks it at 48 miles an hour at 48 hours, has interaction weaken it to 60 miles an hour, and by the 5-day mark, once it's approaching Florida, has it back at 70 miles an hour again, approaching hurricane status again.
Wow.
So that's a big shift from earlier to, was it 12 hours ago they had it as a tropical depression at that point in time, now they have it approaching hurricane status again.
Wow.
So
and you could see more flapping about. You could see more flapping about as the track changes. If it does change, it could flip back towards the west, which would bring it back over Hispaniola, and that would be much more weakening. Or it could move out a little bit further east. Puerto Rico is still quite a significant landmass. Some storms have struggled, but notable example, Hurricane Irene didn't struggle at all over Puerto Rico, became a hurricane over land.
But Maria, for example, did definitely struggle over Puerto Rico. I think right now the general model consensus really wants it to thread the needle between the two, which is very hard. But
I would
it's a
say so
relatively
at that
small.
angle. I mean, goodness me.
It's a relatively small storm, so the chance the center could do it. The official track wants it to do it now, which is kind of incredible based on the current angle it's going at.
Given that
With
it's
this
small, it would have a
weird
bigger
turn.
fighting chance of staying strong as well if it did completely stay over water.
Yeah, and it looks like that's what the National Hurricane Center is starting to lean towards. It's a bit surprising though to see them do that. I guess there's been a shift in their thinking of how it can survive, because if you look at parent models, most of them kill off Dorian. The GFS, HMON, and HWRF all kill it off in the Eastern Caribbean. The European's the only one that keeps it alive, but the ensemble model runs almost certainly contribute towards the national, just general forecasts.
Storm Dorian, which is blowing up right next to Barbados. Have you guys been looking at that big blow up that's just happened?
Terrible timing for a blow up as it's about to go over the island. Convection's obviously going to create more problems for the people living there.
Yeah, it's perhaps likely that gusts might be stronger and localized flooding might increase with heavy rainfall.
Yeah, looks like this. It looks like that's showing signs of possible intensification as well.
Yeah.
I would definitely be concerned in that situation just for people living there. I doubt the sustained winds will change too much from this particular bursting convection. But like you said, gusts can increase. This can also increase certain risk for flash flooding as well, just because it could increase the pace of rainfall in those particular areas just because it's happening right as it is approaching a landmass. Especially higher elevations could be more at risk for increased rainfall to cause mudslides and other flash flooding situations. So people there in Barbados at this point in time should already have their preparations completed, either be hunkered down in their safe locations or have listened to local officials to evacuate low-lying areas if necessary.
You could get hurricane force gusts under that thing right now.
That's true. What is it, 60 miles an hour? Probably, I'm assuming gusts, if I check the 5 p.m. to 70, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
They usually go with something like that, yeah.
Yeah, it says gusts to 70, but with this blow-up in convection, you could be reaching hurricane force gusts over parts of Barbados because they're about to get the direct core of the storm.
All right, we've got loads of questions, I think. I just don't know because I'm so far behind in the comments that I've been waiting to read out some questions.
I'll try to help out.
Do we think Dorian will hit Mexico Beach, Florida? The Legacy GFS model is predicting it. Oh, goodness.
I have not seen that at all. Maybe the Legacy GFS, but that isn't the current GFS model.
Just speculate on that particular location at this point in time. It's a very specific question and location. Ask us again in 5 days. All right.
It could, at the least, we could say so far that the only place we know for certain that will receive impacts are, of course, the Lesser Antilles and the Eastern Northern Antilles. Beyond that, there is the general consensus that it seems in the models that whatever comes out in the Dorian from the Caribbean, once it exits that region, that the Bahamas and Florida, as of right now, it seems that it will be in its path. Beyond that, there's no way we can give specific.
Indeed.
Although, just for description for it, most models have it going into Florida and then up into southeast United States, or curling away either right before or after making landfall in Florida. It seems very unlikely at this time point that you'd see something like it crossing into the Gulf of Mexico and then hitting Mexico Beach in particular as well. But we're still probably 7-8 days out from that time period.
Let's stop beating that one, shall we? Okay, this is a question, basically the essence of the question. Could it do a kind of... Oh, it's gone off my screen. They compared it to Floyd and another storm, Matthew, East Coast track. Well, in terms of track, I suppose it... one of the models later on was predicting that it would move into Florida, then move back out over water near the northern part of Florida, and then move back out to sea somewhere, which is sort of a little bit like Matthew, but these comparisons aren't really very helpful.
Yeah. Someone also asked just a general question. What's the difference between the GFS and GFS Legacy models?
Yeah, well, the GFS had an upgrade. Was it earlier this year? And,
yeah, it was a couple months ago, I think.
we're still not sure whether the upgrade is any good or not. But the Legacy quite often blew things up all the time.
Yeah, GFS actually right now is actually predicting the storm to dissipate by the time it gets to Hispaniola. Kind of like, so it's kind of still seems to be on track with what was forecasted yesterday before some of the changes came about today.
Oh, I forgot, Strat. We've run over. We got to take a short break. All right, we'll be back in just a few minutes, in just a moment actually, whilst we catch our breath and talk more about Dorian after this. So these are the warnings that are currently in effect right now. A hurricane watch for St. Lucia, tropical storm warning for Barbados, Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, tropical storm watch for Dominica, Martinique, Grenada. That's not actually true, is it? Martinique is listed twice. Tropical storm watch is not in effect for Martinique, it's a warning. Grenada, Saba, St. Eustatius and Puerto Rico. We'll change that graphic as soon as we can. This is Force 13 Live, continuing with coverage on Tropical Storm Dorian. Let me just read out the key messages for the storm right now from the National Hurricane Center, doing the due diligence there. Dorian is expected to bring tropical storm conditions to portions of the Lesser Antilles tonight and Tuesday, where tropical storm watches and warnings are in effect. Hurricane conditions are possible in St. Lucia, where a hurricane watch is in effect. Rainfall of 3 to 8 inches is expected for Martinique, St. Vincent, including Barbados, with isolated totals as high as 10 inches possible. Those numbers are up on earlier, by the way. Tropical storm conditions are possible in Puerto Rico on Wednesday, where a tropical storm watch has been issued. Rainfall of 2 to 4 inches with maximum totals of 6 inches are possible across Puerto Rico and St. Croix. Watches will likely be issued for portions of Hispaniola tonight or Tuesday as the threat of wind and rain impacts continues to increase. While uncertainty is high, wind and rain impacts are possible in the Bahamas and Florida later this week and this weekend. Residents in these areas should monitor the progress of Dorian and ensure they have their hurricane plan in place. There is the latest track map on Dorian. Over to Strat if he's got anything for us.
I mean, nothing too particular in this moment of time, other than what we've already been talking about. But there is a question in particular that I'd like to go over, and I think after that we could go back to 6L for a second, because I see some murmurs of that in the chat.
Sure.
Someone's asking if Dorian could keep hurricane intensity after the initial Category 1 locations. I think they're basically asking if it can maintain hurricane status through the latitudes of the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
It all depends what happens. It's like the confidence in what happens with land interaction between Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico is really uncertain at the moment. So it's a wait and see till like approaching near that time that it will actually begin coming near the Greater Antilles.
Yeah, I would say it's going to be dependent on how much Dorian actually intensifies in the next 48 hours. If it barely reaches hurricane status, 80 miles an hour, like the National Hurricane Center says, land interaction could weaken it significantly and not allow it to maintain hurricane status through those islands. If it somehow managed to intensify to a Category 2 hurricane before potentially threading the needle between the island chains, there would be a more significant chance of it maintaining hurricane intensity through that into the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos. At this time, though, in particular, it doesn't look too likely that that happens.
The question there, the chances of rapid intensification for Dorian. We were talking about how it was maybe 44%, was it yesterday?
Yes.
According to the ship's model. I've not seen this, so what is it today, do we know?
I will be.
I mean, it looks more impressive in general with the satellite appearance, but it doesn't look spectacular, if you get what I mean. But then again, Barry looked like utter garbage and it became a hurricane at the same time anyways. So you can't really rule anything out. For all we know, in a joking way, this is already a hurricane. It's just screwing with us because it looks so terrible. But in all seriousness, it's almost certainly not at the moment. I'm inclined to agree with the National Hurricane Center's status of 60 miles an hour right now. If it were want to become a hurricane, yeah, it's starting to look better over time. If it wants to become a hurricane, though, in the next 12 to 24 hours, we'd need to see a bit more cohesiveness form, potentially a better eyewall start to develop.
Okay,
Interestingly, though, even though some of the parent models don't show this at all, they have it killing out. Some of the consensus model runs, the ensembles, intensify it significantly, actually.
Hey, Strat, we'll run through the models shortly if you want to get the visuals up on that, if you like.
Yeah, sure, I'll grab it up. One thing I'm noticing in particular, CMC don't trust for location, but normally it's one that keeps storms weaker in terms of its forecast intensity. Oddly, though, from the ensembles that I see, it's the strongest. It keeps it a bit further east after threading the needle. Doesn't bring it into Florida. Actually intensifies it into the 970s in terms of millibars as it approaches Georgia and the Carolinas instead. So that's going to be something interesting to watch.
Before you get onto it,
numerous ensemble models do that.
Oh, that's another graph. Okay, we'll get onto that shortly. There's another question. What is the chance of Dorian becoming a major hurricane in the first place? I think we have given it 5%, I think.
It would need to pull something drastic to be able to become a major hurricane.
But this is the Caribbean in August. It could happen.
What?
That's why I didn't say it was impossible. That's why I said drastic, because it would need to almost
5%,
double
so
its
1
current
in 20
intensity.
chance.
Okay. I got the information from the ship's diagnostic message.
Great. Let's hear it.
Okay, so the ship's probability of rapid intensification for, let's say, 20 knots and for the next 12 hours is 9%. For 25 knots in 24 hours, it's 43%.
Ooh.
For 30 knots in 24 hours, it's 31%. For 35 knots in 24 hours, it's 25%. And for 40 knots in 24 hours, it's 17%. And 45 knots in 36 hours, it's 36%. 55 knots in 48 hours, 31%. And 65 knots in 72 hours, 21%.
So a 1 in 5 chance that this storm in 48 hours will be, what are we? 130 miles an hour.
That
don't
would
think so.
blow my socks off if it managed to do that.
My goodness, so the ship's model is being very bullish on that then.
It's being incredibly aggressive.
Let's look at the Discord screen now, which is where we're doing facilitating our live stream with our team. And Cooper, I've not properly introduced everyone because we had such a crazy start to our stream today. Welcome, and you're showing us this.
Yes, this is the ECMWF ensemble forecast from 18Z on 5L Dorian, and as you can see, there's a considerable spread in both intensity and track after it moves over Hispaniola and into the Bahamas.
Yes, I mean, you would expect the tracks to really diverge by the 5-day point. Still a pretty decent agreement up to the 5-day point, really 4-day point maybe. I'm quite surprised as to just how tight-knit the models are in general about this threading the needle action between Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic and not really moving over those land masses properly.
I am pretty surprised as well, because you look at the angle Dorian's currently heading at, it's a very unlikely or improbable way for the storm to move, to not make landfall in either Puerto Rico or Hispaniola at all. But for some reason, there's a trend that's continuing to indicate that that could likely happen. Of course, if it does, this impacts from the storm will reach both Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, and even possibly Haiti. But the strongest winds would actually stay offshore in this kind of situation, which you could say is beneficial overall, but for particular regions that could be not good, as increased rainfall, especially over mountainous regions where it can kind of soak out more rain, especially if it decides to kind of crumple up the storm and suck it out to weaken it. That's where you could see potentially more dangerous situation for particular land areas that get heavy rainfall if it threads the needle instead of going straight to one particular landmass.
And there it is on the imagery once again. When do we think 13W will become a tropical storm? It's got a small chance before it reaches the Philippines. You can see it on the left-hand side of your screen right now. You saw it very briefly. But the biggest chance will be after it passes the Philippines. I think it has something about the 20-25% chance before it strikes the Philippines, and then a bigger chance afterwards when it moves into the South China Sea. Keep watching that one closely. It could develop almost spontaneously into a typhoon when it does move towards China and Vietnam. Strat, do you have any models for us?
Yeah, just give me a split second to pull some of them up. I'll tell you when I'm ready to go.
In the meantime, back to Cooper's imagery, and you're showing us now the ocean heat content. That's an interesting graphic at this point.
We're looking here at the ocean heat content, particularly where you see in the Western Caribbean there's high ocean heat content, whereas it's not so much as it is in the Eastern Caribbean, but still quite sufficient for further development of Dorian as it tracks westward and west-northwest or west.
And here's the model for Dorian. We'll start off with the HWRF. There's a multitude of ones that we can use. Interestingly, it shows the history better now of intensification, but it starts off immediately weakening it. It looks like it's weak on the get-go. Yeah, it is tiny. The wind field's tiny. But it looks like the HWRF isn't really picking up on its current intensity and the forecast trend for intensification.
Common problem.
Because it dissipates it in the Eastern Caribbean.
That could happen,
but
though.
watch this. This is interesting.
Uh-oh.
Wait towards the end of the time frame. It develops it back off at the top of the screen, but isn't even tracking it at this point.
Well, that's interesting. How the HWRF... It wasn't that predicting 90 miles an hour earlier today?
It probably was, but look here. It has it at 52 knots at 120 hours.
I just find that fascinating,
right
Strat, how the models have shifted in a more favourable position in terms of track, yet the HWRF has completely backed off. I'm not sure that run is any good.
Well, that's the 12Z. Let's check on the HMON. I think the HMON also kills it off as well, if I want to load this up really quickly. Here it is, 24 hours out in the Eastern Caribbean. and dead. Just like that.
Oh my word.
The GFS does the same thing. If I go out here, we'll start at 24 hours again, passing the Antilles, dead.
So
Before it even reaches Hispaniola.
So
CMC,
hey folks,
how about this one?
if you see any of the usual news agencies doing their spin on this storm, saying it'll be the worst thing ever, like they always do, make sure you call them out. It isn't going to be the worst thing ever,
CMC
but I am still a bit skeptical about these model runs, especially when you look at that
No, because you got to keep in mind these are only the parent models. Ensemble models, many of them actually show Dorian maintaining intensity or strengthening further. Especially the CMC ones, which is unusual to me because usually they're the ones that keep the pressure of the storm highest. If I were to just run over here really quick, the CMC ensembles, a multitude of them bring it below 980 and 970 millibars, which is something you don't usually see from them.
Interesting.
Of course, the parent model has it still extremely weak at over 1,000 millibars at all times.
Yeah.
The ensemble ones are a bit of an outlier compared to the usual intensities that you see from them.
All right.
I also got...
Just a minute. Could I ask Cooper to bring up an image of Tropical Depression 6 right now, as we'd like to show that on the screen. Whilst we wait for that, first there is another look at Dorian. But Sam?
Yes. I would like to share the SST anomalies on my screen here. Actually, hang on. Actually, I'm just gonna... This is just an image, so I'm just gonna put it in the chat room so everybody can see it. Right here, the anomalies showing current sea surface temperatures and how that's going to impact the storm.
We'll show that shortly, but in the meantime, this is imagery now of Tropical Depression 6L that has just formed in the Atlantic in the last hour. That is what we were really rushing to scramble all of our graphics together to reflect the fact that that system has formed. Interesting one as well, if it doesn't keep glitching out on our screen here. We'll have to let that go. But that's looking rather interesting as well. Most of the convection displaced to the east and south of the cyclone. I'm just trying to get that imagery all together. Okay, that's not working so well for me. So back to that latest imagery of Dorian. There's a question. We already dealt with that question. Oh, also Nelson, one of our team members, would like to mention that New Orleans is flooded again.
Yeah, he was posting some images in our Discord chat for people that aren't in it. The link's in the description below. What is he? He's saying knee high in some levels, and that it was a scary experience to drive home, actually.
Wow.
It's not a fun time. Also, I posted some wind shear graphics in the Discord chat if you want to pull those up. It kind of gave me a perspective as to why some of the models are trying to dissipate it. Low shear right now where Dorian is, but as it enters the Eastern Caribbean, shear is very high there at the moment, over 30 knots, directly in the path of the storm.
Okay, this is really odd, Strat, because an image that was posted by one of our other members just below you shows that wind shear is near nil.
What? It's the same website, too.
That's very interesting.
So they can't make their minds up on whether there's any wind shear or not. That's another great help to our forecasting abilities. Of course, those who aren't in the know, wind shear is what kills off storms quite often, as does dry air.
Oh, that's mid-level shear.
Basically, wind shear, dry air, land is bad for storms, and what's good for storms is low wind shear, hot sea surface temperatures, and a moist environment.
Yeah. It says blank wind shear. I think the surface is 30 knots, 25 knots ahead of the storm, but mid shear is nil.
You see, well, that's interesting. I wonder what that might mean for the storm.
That actually baffles me.
I don't, that might. I'm not sure what that would do to the storm. At the mid levels, that's no problem with the convection. The convection will do just fine then. You would think.
Yeah, mid-level. Yeah,
But
what I
low
have
level
is
is trying to show 30
mid-level
knots.
shear.
Okay, we're officially very confused now in the studio. As we try to figure out what's going on with that forecast. But from what I've been looking at, wind shear is expected to be low for a good 48, 72 hours. And that's not what's stopping the storm from intensifying at all. It's dry air that's stopping Dorian from intensifying.
Yeah, that's kind of the big factor right now.
Yeah, I'm going to see if I can actually pull up the latest Sal image. I'll actually post in the Discord.
As you do.
There we go. It's there now, and it
More
is pretty
questions
significant.
here. More questions here. Where do you think East Pacific will have its next named storm? It could be a while, actually. Long Range GFS is expecting a storm next week. But Eastern Pacific really underperforming, really. Although I think we have been treated a lot in the Eastern Pacific in recent years.
Oh, we certainly have. There's this Heron Airler image in the Discord room.
Okay, we're really struggling
Dorian
with this.
is actually kind of carving a path out for itself, though. It's actually seemingly lessening the amount of dry air around it with moisture air from convection that's just bubbling up from the sea. But over the Caribbean, though, there's still a large chunk of dry air that's just moved in. Very dry, actually. Directly in front of the storm is mostly moist, not too much dust, but past it is a high level. Unless that moves further out with Dorian approaching, that could be a very significant problem for it as it approaches Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic.
But what
if it
I'd like to
survives-
see is what this graphic looked like about 2 days ago when the storm was approaching the area it's currently in, because it might just be
I
pushing
have a
the
5-day
whole...
graphic if you want me to show that.
Might just be pushing the whole thing away.
Yeah, the thing is, once the storm gets a solid moisture envelope, it's much more easier for it to push the dry air away from it, especially in a low shear
There it goes.
environment.
Yeah,
There it
here's the
goes.
5-day imagery of it. You see this huge plume in the Eastern Caribbean, but Dorian
So it's
started
been
to
doing
build
just
a
fine.
protective shield among itself.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's the thing. It's
if it
the
starts to
moisture
move in,
envelope.
if it starts to move into the Eastern Caribbean and it doesn't continue to do this, it could be a problem. But if it persists and it does thread the needle into the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos, then you could see a potentially more dangerous situation. Although it is notable to heed that this far out, there is unusual uncertainty with potential intensity at that point in time. And intensity is the least accurate part of forecasting for tropical cyclones.
Quite true. Especially for this storm, because as I've been seeing, the track is looking pretty good. Pretty confident, I should say.
Almost certainly, and then there, at the very top, you can see the remnants of Chantal literally become a dust circulation as well.
Just hopping back to that imagery now, you can again see what happened with Chantal there. Oh dear.
Yeah, it's basically dissipated into a dry state at this point.
It's a dust cyclone.
That's unique terminology.
In case
It's a
people are
dust
wondering about Barbados right now, reports on the ground from what I'm seeing are still anticipating the storm. It hasn't really arrived. Cloud cover is starting to increase over the island, but nothing is really occurring just yet. Actually, the winds are getting up. Winds of 25 miles an hour, apparently.
Yeah, someone asked a good question in the chat just for us to answer. The Atlantic Ocean has asked if a storm can create its
Has it?
own moist environment. Yes, the Atlantic Ocean has asked us this question.
Okay. Yeah, they certainly can.
And looking at that dust map mode, it looks like it's been attempting to do that.
And just again looking at the warnings, if you've just joined us, just to remind you what those warnings are. It's still the incorrect graphic. St. Lucia has a hurricane watch. Tropical storm warning for Barbados, Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Tropical storm watch for Dominica, Grenada, Saba, St. Eustatius and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is the latest location to be under a kind of watch or warning right now, and that may be upgraded to a tropical storm warning later down the line. Let's just hop back across these images now to 13W. If you've just joined us, this is what Tropical Depression Jenny, as it has been named in the Philippines, looks like. And that is headed towards Luzon this morning as you wake up in the Philippines, coming up to 6 a.m. there. That's how that one is looking like right now. We're coming up to the end of this hour, and if you've got any more questions for us, you can send them in at any time, and we'll take your anything that you send in, really. David, anything on Facebook? You're simulcasting on Facebook right now.
Nothing, Nathan.
Ah, okay.
Only
well,
that one question,
you
but
can send
I'll
in
be.
couple of questions there too. Great. There's another look at what 13W is looking like right now on Cooper's screen. Again, approaching the Philippines, a big band pushing through right now, so we are monitoring multiple tropical systems tonight. That's the end of our first hour of coverage. We're going to continue for at least another hour here, Force 13 Live, with the latest on Tropical Storm Dorian, Tropical Depression 6, and Tropical Depression 13W. Also named Jenny. Back in a few. Continues in a moment. You can follow Force 13's outlets, the website force13.com, our YouTube page, youtube.com/Force13, on Facebook under the same name, Force13, and our Twitter handle, it's @Force13 if you wish to get in touch. You can also add Force13 on Skype, and my personal account on Discord, Fool13, at extension 9094. watching Force 13's live streaming service. Latest at 6 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time on this August 26th. Dorian is now 60 miles from Barbados at this hour, with winds of 60 miles per hour, moving at about 14 miles per hour towards the west-northwest. So at this rate, to cover that 60-mile period distance, it will be another 4 hours before it possibly tracks directly over the island. It will then move on to St. Lucia, where it could strike as a strong tropical storm, maybe even a hurricane. They've got hurricane watches out as a precaution. And then it will move on into the Eastern Caribbean, possibly affect some more islands in the vicinity, and then could move on to Puerto Rico. Could be a hurricane at that point as well as it moves through, very close to the Dominican Republic too. What's most interesting though is the long range forecast. Moving through the Bahamas as a tropical storm, and then could re-intensify on approach to Florida by the end of the week. We don't know yet what is going to happen exactly, but to help make sense of it all, with me right now is our team here for a second hour. My name is Nathan Foy. I'm joined by Sam, David, Cooper and Orlando for this hour.
Hello.
Yes.
Good to be here as always.
So this is what we're looking at right now, the track forecast from National Hurricane Center. Do you guys agree with that track first and foremost, the forecast from the National Hurricane Center?
The forecast cone is, I believe the center will go somewhere within that, so I say yes.
Anyone not agree with it?
I kind of have some. I do have a few. I mean, I'm not. Since this is a small. Again, since this is a relatively small storm, it's difficult to predict the direct track of the storm. Like, we are starting to see a bit more of a model consensus running towards a more northern track, but I still wouldn't rule out a more southerly track. It really depends, because you also have the newly formed tropical depression 90, which is
6L.
formed from 98. Yes, 6L.
Tropical depression
which
6. Yeah.
Yes, tropical depression 6, and it does have a bit of a. It is starting to have a bit of an impact on the steering on the Bermuda High, and if the Bermuda High was stronger, then we would be seeing a bit more of a southerly track with Dorian.
These are the warnings that are out there right now. A hurricane watch for St. Lucia, a tropical storm warning for Barbados, Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Barbados reporting winds of 25 miles an hour at the moment with gusts to 39. Tropical storm watch for Dominica, Grenada, Saba, St. Eustatius and Puerto Rico. The Puerto Rico warning went up, the watch rather went up an hour ago, and that could be upgraded to a warning in due course. The Hispaniola might receive its first tropical storm watch later on this evening as well. Let's just read out the latest from the National Hurricane Center at this time and what effects they're expecting in detail. Just reading off their advisory here. Dorian is expected to produce total rain accumulations of 3 to 8 inches in the Windward Islands from Martinique south to St. Vincent, including Barbados. Isolated maximum totals of 10 inches are possible across the northern Windward Islands. Rainfall totals of 1 to 3 inches are expected from the Grenadines south to Grenada and across Dominica. Rainfall totals of 2 to 4 inches with maximum totals of 6 inches are possible across Puerto Rico and St. Croix. Hurricane conditions are possible tonight and early Tuesday within the Hurricane Watch area. Tropical storm conditions are likely in the warning area by late today, very soon indeed. Tropical storm conditions are possible within the Tropical Watch area in the Lesser Antilles tonight or Tuesday and in Puerto Rico on Wednesday. Swells generated by Dorian will begin affecting portions of the Lesser Antilles tonight and continue into Tuesday. These swells could cause life-threatening surf and rip current conditions. Just to point out the potential hazards from Tropical Depression 6 as well, which I still don't have on the screen at this point. Actually, they're not expecting any hazards at this moment in time, so it looks like, according to them, that all those eastern coastlines won't be getting any significant surf, at least not at this stage. I'm still yet to bring up an image of 6 again, and here it is now. If you've not seen it yet, that is the track forecast for Tropical Depression 6. Not too far away from the US East Coast, but is not likely to cause any impacts there. It could, however, strike Nova Scotia as a tropical storm on Thursday or Friday before moving on to Newfoundland. So Atlantic Canada could receive some significant storm conditions there. They're expecting a peak wind speed of 50 miles per hour. Let's go back to some imagery of Dorian. Here it is. I'm not sure this imagery is actually up to date anymore. Just checking to see whether that is the case, but that is how Dorian has looked recently. Yeah, this imagery is still up to date. A decent loop showing how long, about 6-7 hour period of Dorian proceeding towards Barbados, which I'm not sure whether the Barbados outline is on these maps or not. No, it isn't, but it is pretty much directly underneath that big blow-up of convection now in those last frames. So really that rainfall is going to really start up now over Barbados in the next hour, and you'll probably end up starting to see tropical storm force winds. I should think that's what logic would dictate at this point. Cooper is also showing us imagery of Tropical Depression 13W, which has been numbered by the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, and in the Philippines it has been named Tropical Depression Jenny. If you've got any questions about any of these storms tonight or this morning, whoever you are around the world, start your message with Force 13 all in text. Would any of our team contributors like to say a word?
Well, the development in, I believe, 13W is quite frankly interesting, especially since it's going to be passing over the Philippines soon. And beyond that, there is, of course, the possibility of intensification, but how intense remains uncertain, and where it will exactly impact also.
Just looking at some forecasts here. We're still looking at the Camarines Sur region to get the highest amount of rainfall in the Philippines, as well as maybe parts of the western coast of Luzon too. Could all get up to or over 300 millimeters of rain. That is 12 inches. Parts of Vietnam and Laos could also get large amounts of rain from this storm when it moves in late this week into the weekend. Still not sure, still a bit sketchy information on that because it is a long way out for those countries, but something to be watching out for, and it could be a massive rainmaker, that one. But back to Dorian on the screen again here, and there it is on the infrared imagery. Just looking at just looking back at the Western Pacific forecast actually, because Strat didn't show it on the model runs when we were looking at it earlier. Let's see if we can get it onto my screen now. Of course, we are catering towards everyone here tonight. We have plenty of different storms to track. Just want to bring this to people's attention. This is what the GFS is currently saying in the Western Pacific right now. So there you can see the first system, the depression, becoming a tropical storm in the South China Sea, intensifying quite significantly there, 970s millibars. And then behind it on day 3, 4, 5, you've got that new system forming as well. Develops, spins up really quite quickly into a tropical storm in the same area that Jenny is in right now, and then really blows up 970 millibars before landfall in the Philippines. We're getting towards the latter part of the model run now, so it starts to get a bit more speculative, but there it is, heading towards China in the 960s and then moving inland. So that is something rather interesting to be watching out for again in the Western Pacific. A lot of them taking very similar tracks so far towards Philippines and Taiwan and places like that. Every so often you can get a train of typhoons that all go and strike the Philippines, one after the other. Quite rare, but it does sometimes happen. And who knows, maybe this is the start of another trend. But we'll see on that. This is Force 13 Live. Let's see if we can take some questions. Start your message with Force 13. A bunch of them have come in right now. Do we think that Dorian is trying to develop an eye at all? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well,
I don't think it doesn't look like it right now. There's still a good amount of still trying to develop its convective structure at the moment. You're seeing a lot of scattered blowups within the system.
it is in fact trying to develop an eye wall, but beyond that, an actual eye appearing, no.
What makes you think that it's developing an eye wall? What are you seeing that's...
Well, I believe they hinted that in the discussion for Dorian. And also microwave imagery have hinted at some development of such a structure around the core.
More questions here. Someone's just notified us about a plane taking off, recon plane, so I don't know if anyone could keep us up to date on that. More questions.
Actually, it appears that from what I've last seen, that there was a recon plane. There's a recon plane circling Dorian, and in order looking to get some readings on the current runs.
Indeed, you
on
get
it.
different kinds of flights, of course. Is there a chance that Tropical Depression 6 will become a hurricane? Pretty small chance at the minute by the looks of things, but you never know what might happen over there in the Western Atlantic. I'm hearing feedback from David, I think, at the minute. David, I'm sorry to flag you up like that, but that is the case. Alright, well, that has been sorted out. More questions. What if Dorian became a Category 1 before making landfall in Florida? Well, that is not out of the question at all. That could happen. National Hurricane Center taking it to strong tropical storm status before striking Florida, almost implying that it could become a hurricane, actually. It's a wait-and-see game. You really have to see what happens as it moves over the Greater Antilles. We're not going to have a definitive answer or anything close to it until it makes that crossing over either Puerto Rico or over the Dominican Republic, clears the islands, and then we'll see just how much it's weakened and whether it will get going again, whether it will get a spurt on and maybe challenge for hurricane status. But trending towards yes is the answer that we're looking at the moment, but we really can't say for sure, and we won't for some time. So far, what model can be considered the model of the year? Does anyone want to take that question?
Model of the
No? Okay, well, who knows? I don't know.
They all haven't been great.
Yeah, well, the models have been struggling quite a bit this year, it would appear.
Agreed.
ECMWF, I guess.
Yeah.
Probably
Honestly, if I had
stands out
to
from the
pick
others.
one.
Why is 13W or Jenny? Why is its pressure lower than Dorian? You tend to notice this quite a lot when you're comparing the Atlantic to the Western Pacific. Western Pacific cyclones always have, not always, but very often have much deeper pressures. It's a much larger ocean. The storms are quite often a lot larger. Dorian is actually fairly small, and it is lower latitude as well, if I'm not mistaken, by quite a bit. So those two things are factors. The central Atlantic is known for having storms that always start off with very high pressures. It's not uncommon to see tropical storms get designated with pressures around 1008, 1009 millibars. Dorian was, how strong was Dorian? What was its pressure when it was first designated? I think maybe something like 1007 or somewhere around that.
I think it was 2008 or something like
I
that.
believe.
Yeah, so it happens all the time over in the Atlantic. The pressures are often higher across the board as well. You know, you saw Hurricane Irma, even though it had 180 mile an hour winds, the pressure was still only 914 millibars. Compared to a Western Pacific storm, it's pretty much unheard of to have a 180 mile an hour storm with a pressure as high as that. They're usually down in the 800s by that point. So there is a massive difference between the Atlantic and the Western Pacific. Eastern Pacific's probably like somewhere in the middle. The Indian Ocean, I think, is even more exaggerated with those lower pressures. You can sometimes have weak tropical storms with a pressure in the 980s.
Yes, and to add to that, how does the pressure readings affect the impacts or the intensity of the storm?
I'm not sure it really does have a massive impact. I suppose with lower pressures, obviously, it also means, I guess the biggest pressure effect would be wave heights and storm surge, because with a lower pressure in the atmosphere, the water then surges upwards a little bit where the low pressure center is. So I would imagine that is the biggest and probably the only major factor with low pressures.
Agreed.
Of course, when you've got 100 and odd mile an hour winds circling around that low pressure center as well, the waves do all kinds of crazy things too. The new GFS was the only one to pick up on Dorian, is another comment we've just had here. Are they talking about initially, or you might be
I
right
believe
on
so.
that? You might be right on that. Why do storms that form in unusual areas, for example medicanes, have eyes at lower strengths than in normal areas? Not always, but I do get your point. When you have storms that are less tropical or subtropical, they do have eye-like features. The convection never really blows up over the center of the storm because of those lower sea surface temperatures. But I'm not mainly into the science behind all that. You probably want to talk to Hank about exactly why that is the case, that they blow up around rather than in the center. I only know that is actually the case. But in the tropical zones, you've obviously got all that warm water as well, so the convection is always a lot deeper the further south you are, and well, not necessarily the further south you are, but over those warmer sea surface temperatures is more likely to produce that deeper, more explosive convection. Also of note is that convection does tend to be deeper in weaker storms compared to further north. Did I get that right? Or is it the other way around? Yeah, further north you can have for instance, you can have weaker convection for just as strong a storm as strong convection will get you for a storm further south, if that makes any sense at all. But that's going off tangent a little bit there. What else do we have here? Could Dorian become a hurricane by early morning? That's not completely out of the question either. I would give that a bit less than half chance. Hurricane Watch is out there for a reason on St. Lucia, which the storm will pass over tonight. And that remains to be seen. Odds are it won't become a hurricane overnight, but there is, a significant chance that it could pull a little surprise there. Will Dorian be like the Labor Day hurricane? Stop right there.
Yeah,
because it was also small and approached Florida as a tropical storm during this time of year. I think it will not happen. It will not be a Labor Day hurricane.
And even if it was to actually happen, there's no way we'll ever be able to know that at this point in time.
Will Jenny or TD6 be named? Is a basic question that we've received there. If you're asking me personally, I think they will both get named. What do you guys think?
I think it's entirely possible that 6L is already a tropical storm. There were 35-knot wind barbs on an ASCAP pass, scatterometer pass from earlier today, but discussion, the Hurricane Center noted that they were rated, which is often does happen, but very well could be a tropical storm as of at this moment.
And a comment there saying the legacy, I can't say anything today. The legacy GFS more accurate than the updated GFS with Dorian so far. Do we agree with that? I've not really been comparing the two.
Yeah, I haven't been paying much mind to the legacy, so I wouldn't know.
I'm pretty sure that one of them was actually dissipating Dorian over the Caribbean, but I can't remember which one it was.
Well, quite a few models are doing that now. Indeed, the HWRF, as we saw in the last hour, is doing the same thing now, which I was completely baffled at.
It's honestly the best I can say with Dorian, because quite frankly, I did not think it was going to get this far, although I had the feeling that there was a potential for it to. Best way I can describe the storm is the little storm that could, because it's fighting against odds that are stacked against it, but now it's defying it and now pushing itself into a better environment, so we'll only see.
Yeah, storms of this size tend to have those kinds of characteristics and are kind of more able to, or they're kind of known for defying the odds a bit more. So they're a little more difficult to predict as well.
Agreed.
Could Tropical Depression 6 impact New England? Is a question that we've received here, and we're looking at that imagery now on Cooper's screen. Given that a lot of that convection is already displaced to the east, it seems a bit far-fetched to say that it will have any impacts. I'm just left thinking about comparing it to Chris of last year at the moment, because it's moving so slowly. Chris was actually a bit closer to land, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
I don't believe Chris hit any land, did it? Any areas inland, did it?
Sorry, what was that?
I said I don't believe Chris tracked anywhere over land, did it?
No. Alright, more questions here. Is it possible that Tropical Storm Dorian could reach major hurricane status? Well, as you see every so often at the bottom of the screen, we're giving it about a 5% chance, so, it's not out of the question. That's in the next 5 days, albeit, too. This storm could last longer than that, probably will. More questions here. Will 6L impact Maryland? For any US state, the answer is no at the moment.
Outside of waves and perhaps with current risks, no, there would be minimal effects.
So that is pretty much where we're at right now. There's 6 and Dorian in the Atlantic. The view from the National Hurricane Center, nothing expected in the Eastern Pacific in the next 48 hours, and in the Central Pacific the same story. And there is the Western Pacific right now showing Tropical Depression 13W. Do we think that we will use the Greek alphabet in the 2020s? We're getting some off-the-wall questions now, it seems.
Yeah, there's firstly, getting to the Greek alphabet is a feat within itself, and secondly, it's beyond something we could ever say could happen.
All right. Well, I think we're going to take a short break in just a moment, or in fact, maybe even at this point slightly early, because I have to be drawn away for just a few minutes whilst I go and update some more things here in the studio at this time. We're going to run to the end of this hour, so we'll have some more stuff for you in the next half hour. Keep the questions coming in, and we'll be back in just a few minutes whilst we recollect our thoughts. Making its infamous landfall, Hurricane Michael is still a Category 3 as it enters the state of Georgia. Well, we're back. This is the latest on Tropical Storm Dorian and everything else that goes with it right now. There are actually 3 tropical cyclones active around the world. Dorian, Tropical Depression 6 and Tropical Depression 13W shooting by on the screen there. Running for another half hour here. We're going to be finishing up at the end of the hour. And then after that, we're going to have a tropical weather bulletin as normal. For those of you who are familiar with how we work, tropical weather bulletin will be released an hour after we finish tonight. Or this morning, wherever you are around the world. It is 6:30 in the Philippines, ahead of Tropical Depression Jenny, as it is named over there. Here's some latest imagery of Tropical Storm Dorian right now, which is getting very close to Barbados. It was 60 miles away at the start of this hour. Given that it's moving at 14 miles per hour, it should get there in about another 3.5 hours. My name is Nathan Foy for this last half hour, joined by the team consisting of Sam, David and Orlando, and Cooper as well. Welcome back.
Good to be here, Nathan. And National Weather Service New Orleans has just put out a posting, and this follows on to your comment to Nelson. The NWS is reporting radar estimates 3 to 5 inches of rain fell across portions of the New Orleans metro this afternoon.
That's quite impressive, and localized flooding.
That is.
Localized flooding as well. A reminder of the watches and warnings then. A hurricane watch for St. Lucia, a tropical storm warning for Barbados, Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. A tropical storm watch for Dominica, Grenada, Saba, St. Eustatius and now Puerto Rico. That's been in effect, the last one there for Puerto Rico, has been in effect since 5 p.m. It's now 6:31 local time and this is Force 13 Live. Let's take some more questions. Everyone's talking about GFS Legacy model because it's predicting the most out of Dorian. We know that already. We did show... Did we show it properly earlier? I know I've seen it personally, but it was predicting a storm in the 980s, I believe, moving across Florida. It's certainly not out of the realms of possibility. It could strike Florida as a hurricane. That is very true. But what is even truer and a big hurdle in the way of Tropical Storm Dorian right now is those islands, the Greater Antilles, which completely do a number on storms very often. They are a big barrier, unfortunately for them, because they often get some very strong hurricanes, the Hispaniola and Cuba in particular, and then the intensity is brought down quite a bit by the time it reaches the US typically. That's why very few storms make landfall on the US as a Category 5. Only 3 in history, isn't it?
Yes, and the most recent one was last year with Michael.
4 now, isn't it? Oh, I don't know. Is it 3 or 4? Is Michael the third?
That's a good super cyclone challenge question.
The Labor Day Hurricane, Camille, and Michael. I can't think of any others right now. Okay, great. If we've forgotten about anything and we're just being completely...
Oh, Andrew. Was Andrew another?
I knew it was 4. Alright, Andrew, the one that we've been comparing, well not we, but a lot of viewers and the community have been comparing this storm to for some reason. It's nothing like Andrew. So there it is, the track from the National Hurricane Center. Just to reiterate those key messages, Dorian is expected to bring tropical storm conditions to portions of the Lesser Antilles tonight and Tuesday, where tropical storm watches and warnings are in effect. Hurricane conditions are possible in St. Lucia, where a hurricane watch is in effect. Rainfall of 3 to 8 inches is expected from Martinique to St. Vincent, including Barbados, with isolated totals as high as 10 inches possible. Gandalf White 2 has sent a super chat, which Strat would be extremely pleased about. Thank you very much for your support, by the way. It is very much appreciated, and it goes into the work that we do all the time. What would it take for a Category 4 or 5 hurricane to hit New York City? It would have to be very fast moving, and it would have to have record high sea surface temperatures, and it would somehow have to have no wind shear and a moist environment around it. The closest thing ever to that is probably the New England hurricane of 1938.
Nathan, I just want to cut in. I have a question from Jared on Facebook. He's just asking about the UK model.
I've not seen it. For some reason, it never pops up on a lot of these model spreads. If anyone in our team has seen the UK Met model, please let me know as soon as possible. Let's see if we can get more questions. Okay, another very long-range question. Will the 2020s be more active than the 2010s? We have no idea. Might be quite hard to do, to be quite honest. I'm not so sure. I'm really not sure. No one could ever tell you the answer. How can I get involved with the project, like be a member? Well, that's rather interesting too. You can join our fold. We are always looking for people to help us with our work as well. Human resources is very important with the work that we do. All voluntary at this stage, covering the latest always, as we have been doing for the last 7 years. I don't want to waffle too much about what we do at this point whilst we're supposed to be tracking the storms, but people have asked. I guess the main first step is to send an email to us, contact@force13.com, or join our community Discord server, which is at the bottom of the screen right now, conveniently. There's a direct link there underneath on our description on YouTube and Facebook. Now that that's over with, let's see if we can get some more questions. Will 6L affect Delaware or be like Sandy? Oh, hold your horses right there. It's Sandy? Come on now. Nothing like. Never will be. So just keep those Sandy references locked away in a very dark cupboard. Nothing like. Crikey. Just getting over that one. Looks like, okay, more comments and questions here. Looks like the track of Dorian has it not hitting the Dominican Republic as much as before, so maybe it can regenerate over the waters in the Bahamas and get back to hurricane status. Yeah, not impossible at all. I would say that is a fair chance of happening, actually. If it does barely strike the Dominican Republic, skirts the coast, as the National Hurricane Center has been saying for quite a while, it's got a very good chance, I would say more than half chance of becoming a hurricane, if it gets there in one piece. If it doesn't and weakens to a depression, then it will have a lot more work ahead of it and it might not get to hurricane status, therefore. It also depends whether it will take a straight beeline towards southern Florida or whether it will skirt the east coast a little bit more. And that might give it a little bit more time up the Gulf Stream to become a hurricane too. But that again is way out into the future. Is it possible that Dorian can still have over 1,000 millibars and still be a Category 1 hurricane? It has happened before. I think it was... I might know, but I just want to clarify just to be sure. I think it was a hurricane, obviously. Yep, Hurricane Bob of 1985 was 75 miles an hour and 1,002 millibars. It can happen. It is extremely rare. I don't think Dorian will be one. I think it will slip below 1,000 millibars if and when it becomes a hurricane. Now, the question's been altered slightly. Will it be a Canadian Sandy? No. Nope, no Sandy whatsoever. Just get rid of Sandy from your vocabulary. Tropical Depression 6 will be absolutely nothing like Hurricane Sandy. Just want to confirm that for everyone watching. When do you think will be the last active season before we go back to below average seasons? Well, you could be looking at it right now. This could be a below average season before we get to the end of it. The average is 12 storms, so if we don't get 12 storms, we've had a below average season. And at the moment, we are at 5. We're at 4, soon to be 5. Maybe a few more behind. Well, but then again, you know, some long-range models at the minute are predicting a lot of activity in the Atlantic late next week. May or may not happen, but obviously if it did, then that would really throw away the chances of having a below average season this year. Oh, we had that question already. Just going through some more things. Will Dorian die out in the North Atlantic? I assume they mean if it moves towards Florida, then moves back out off towards the open Atlantic, towards the northeast, pretty much where Tropical Depression 6 is. It will survive for quite some time, I would imagine. Maybe, well, you know, Chantal was doing alright at 40 degrees north for a little while, for a few hours at least. So Dorian will probably last quite a while before turning post-tropical somewhere up there in the North Atlantic, if it does end up going that way in the end. There's a question there which is not quite related, but it is related to a recent storm, saying about Typhoon Crosa and Category 3 storm and why our estimate is, they say, much lower. It's only slightly lower at 110 miles per hour, based on our satellite estimates. Only 5 mile an hour difference between ourselves and what the JTWC said, 115, but it is 1 category difference, so it does raise eyebrows. Hope that helps. And another one here, how do I find long-range models that have activity next week? So you're deliberately going out looking for models that show activity. Well, you'll have to see for yourself. I can't guarantee that any of the models will be showing activity at any particular point in time. I don't know what this is becoming, but here we go. After the Caribbean landfalls, would Dorian still be active? Most likely, yes. It's looking very unlikely now that it will die. Stranger things have happened in the Eastern Caribbean. Is it possible that Dorian can manage to skirt the coast of the Dominican Republic and then again go south of Florida? That's a very interesting question, actually. I think it won't manage to avoid Florida completely, at least to the south. It will probably strike very southern Florida if it was to go more south than we might expect. But I think the best guess, which is really a guess at this early stage, is that it would be somewhere along the eastern coast north of the Miami-Dade area. Could Dorian go in the Gulf Coast, enter the Gulf region? It could do via Florida. Would Maria be a good comparison to Dorian's track? Maria was a little bit further north, so I guess you could just project that southwards a little bit, I suppose, but intensity-wise, not at all. Track-wise, okay, fine, up until the Bahamas, and then they will diverge.
And the conditions are much less favorable, I believe, than they were for Maria. It's not so favorable for Dorian.
No, well, again, it's the dry air that's really stopping it.
Yeah, if you did not have that dry air, then we'd probably be talking, probably a whole different story. We probably would be seeing this becoming this would be a potentially catastrophic hurricane, but with that dry air, that's not really limiting its potential.
We're running for another 15 minutes here before we wrap up tonight. It is, we can just tell you now that Dorian is 46 miles from Barbados now, so it's clawed 14 miles towards Barbados in the last 45 minutes. rough estimates on those positions, but it is definitely moving towards towards Barbados. I don't know if I said the Bahamas before, that sometimes does slip, but it will get there in the next 3 or 4 hours, make landfall rather if it does, or pass its closest pass to Barbados in the next 3 or 4 hours. The convection, looking at the satellite imagery, can't tell you what's going on the ground at the minute, but satellite imagery shows that convection is over the island right now, so there will definitely be cloud cover, possibly some heavy rain occurring at this time. And it could get worse than that yet.
Yeah, it's really blowing up convection right at the moment, and it's more than likely, I believe we mentioned earlier that there's a potential for perhaps even hurricane force wind gusts that might affect the island, and increased possibility of flash flooding as a result of the heavy increase of convection.
There it is again, water vapor imagery showing the storm's convection there really blowing up just east of Barbados right now. They're in for what looks like a drenching in the next few hours, with potentially hurricane force gusts. Probably the biggest blow up we've seen so far. Well, is it as big as the one the other day? I'm not sure, but it's a big blow up right now.
Yeah, I don't believe it's as big, or at least, I'm not sure, but it's either between the one yesterday and this one today that make up the largest.
So again, there it is. And there's some more imagery of the storm. We've got imagery everywhere on this right now. Let's go back to Cooper's. Is it Cooper showing us this right now? Showing us the floater imagery on Tropical Depression 13W again. Any observations that you can make at this time?
It looks rather disorganized at the moment.
Yeah.
Except for the obvious. But disorganized at the moment.
We heard a foreign voice there. It's Ryan. Hello, Ryan. How are you?
Hi. Hello, everybody.
He's just joined us here. People come in and out. There's a revolving door.
Welcome. Yes. That's basically what our chat room is, a revolving door.
This is just basically a live chat room at this point, but we're enjoying it. Okay, but obviously we are keeping everyone up to date with the information. It is very important. And hopefully we're doing alright with that. Please let us know how we're doing. We're getting lots of questions again. So, looks like the southern side of Tropical Depression 6 is trying to split from the north side. Well, it's interesting to note what's going on with that, and it's quite a complex situation. Don't have any imagery of that just at the minute. But what models have been depicting is that the northern side of this system branches off and becomes an extratropical cyclone of its own and strikes Newfoundland before 6L arrives, and that's probably the reason why it has slowed down as well and is expected to stall for the next 2 days. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that in here.
I do find it interesting that it's supposed to stall. I wasn't really expecting that, to be honest.
Which storm?
6L.
Yeah, the new depression there. Okay, just looking here. Could Barbados or St. Lucia weaken the hurricane, they say? It's not yet a hurricane. I mean, usually the answer would be no. Not really. But could this storm be so small that even smaller islands like these could have an impact on its intensity?
That is a good question. I mean, I think these islands are they flat or are they more, I guess, like mountainous is the real question.
I don't know about Barbados, but the Lesser Antilles are quite hilly, aren't they?
Yeah.
St. Lucia is only 26 miles long, 27 miles long.
Yeah.
And Barbados, from one end to the other, is a bit less than that, about 21 miles. You won't hear those statistics anywhere else. Try and keep people...
Yeah, but that's
up to speed.
You know, that's almost, I want to say at least like a quarter of the size of the storm. I mean,
Well,
that's
yes, yeah.
huge in comparison with the storm. So it definitely could really, weaken Dorian.
Can tropical storms form an eye? A question there.
Yes.
We've
Go
seen-
back to Croza, just a few weeks ago.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
I believe another good example might be Gordon.
Mm.
It had an eye-like feature on radar when it was moving past Florida.
And don't a lot of people think that was a hurricane?
I don't.
I don't think so either.
No.
Could Dorian be rapidly intensifying? Is a question here. I highly doubt that's the case. It looks like a typical tropical storm blow-up that quite often happens.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that.
I would say at worst, if this blow-up gets really large and sustains for a while, they might call it a 75-mile-an-hour Category 1. But it would have to go on for several more hours yet and get quite a bit larger.
Agreed.
So at the minute, do we still think 60 mile an hour is a fair estimate, or would we might be tempted to just bump it up a little bit to 65 at this stage? What do you think?
I would. Yeah.
65 might be a fair bet, I guess.
I think, 60 is fine, but I could definitely see 65.
Some more imagery there as well. We're really running out of time now before we finish up here, so last chance really to get the questions in. Sensible ones, hopefully. What are the chances of a hurricane in Florida out of Dorian? I would say the chances are quite significant. Maybe just slightly less than half, but quite, not far from approaching half chance now. Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's
Or
capable
Orlando?
that Florida might have some type of impact.
Ryan, any thoughts?
No, not really.
Okay. What are the chances that 6L could make landfall in North Carolina? Near nil.
No. It's probably the worst thing that anything on the U.S. East Coast, the worst thing that they're going to get from 6L is just going to be, high surf, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, just it might not even happen. But what I found really surprising with the GFS model is how that they've been taking it from the GFS model is taking it into near Hispaniola and dissipating, which is, I don't really agree with that one, but GFS a lot of times seems to have other ideas.
So let's wrap up here and just reiterate what the latest information is before we go off the air. Just a reminder, we will be doing a tropical weather bulletin as normal in just over an hour's time on the Force 13 channel. If you're new to us, you can subscribe and get the latest videos which are uploaded rather regularly, especially at the height of the season, which we are entering now. A hurricane watch is in effect for St. Lucia, a tropical storm warning for Barbados, Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a tropical storm watch for Dominica, Grenada, Saba, St. Eustatius and Puerto Rico. There's the key messages. Up to 10 inches of rain is possible along some of those Lesser Antilles. Tropical storm conditions are possible in Puerto Rico on Wednesday. 6 inches are possible there and in St. Croix. Watches will likely be issued for parts of Hispaniola tonight or on Tuesday. And whilst uncertainty is high, wind and rain impacts are possible in the Bahamas and Florida later this week and this weekend. Residents in these areas should monitor the progress of Dorian and ensure that they have their hurricane plan in place. Leaving us with the track map once again. There it is right now. That was as of 5 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and expected to become a hurricane before passing very close to some of those islands. Maybe moving through the Mona Passage into just north of the Dominican Republic, and then off through the Bahamas and towards Florida. Very uncertain, that day 3 to 5 outlook, because it really depends how much the storm weakens over the Greater Antilles, how much energy it's got left, whether it can sustain itself, re-strengthen as it heads back, as it moves back towards the southeastern US. No doubt we'll be seeing tropical storm watches for the Bahamas at least. Any closing thoughts from the team?
Well, I'd like to say that for anyone that's in the islands, that to pay attention to local authorities and any kind of resources that may be provided to the public, and any that may be required. Beyond that, ensure that you have enough. Ensure that you are prepared for the approaching system if you are in the path, and just keep a close eye and monitor if you can.
Okay then, well, that'll be it from us at this point. As I said before, Tropical Weather Bulletin coming up in just over an hour on the channel. You can of course find Force 13's outlets, Facebook and Twitter. We're on there, search Force 13 all in text. You can also find our Discord server, it's underneath our video right now in the description on YouTube and on Facebook, where we've been simulcasting tonight's stream. I don't know when we'll be doing updates after tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. There will probably be more updates later this evening and obviously tomorrow during the day. It's going to be a very busy few days on both sides of the world, over in the Western Atlantic and in the Western Pacific near the Philippines, where a tropical cyclone is developing there as well. Signal 1 warnings in effect for large parts of Luzon this morning, Philippine time, and that just may develop into a tropical storm before striking land. Its name is Jenny, given that name given by a Pegasa. 13W is the JTWC label. That's everything here. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for joining us live, and we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope it's been very useful to you, and we'll see you again soon. Good night.